This happened about 15 years ago. I was 21 years old and living in my very first apartment. It was a small bachelor apartment in a sketchy area. I grew up in a town that was known to be rough and tough. I knew how to handle myself and learned at a young age to keep my head down and not to go looking for trouble. My apartment building was behind a bar. A lot of the customers of the bar would stand outside to smoke. When they stood outside to smoke, they would be looking at my apartment. Most of the people who were out smoking kept to themselves. A few would nod and say hello if I passed by. Never any issues. Until one evening. One evening I came home from work. I passed the bar and saw this extremely tall man smoking outside. As I passed by, he stared at me. I gave him a slight nod, but he didn't acknowledge me. He just continued to stare. It made me uncomfortable, but I didn't think much of it. About an hour later, I heard a knock on my door. It was odd because you have to buzz people into the building. The building only had 8 units, and I didn't really know any of the neighbors. I froze because I really didn't want to talk to anyone, but the knocking continued. I finally shouted, "Who is it?" But there was no response. I shouted again, "Who's there?" And the voice said, "It's Tom." I didn't know anyone named Tom, so I shouted back, "I don't know anyone named Tom. You must have the wrong apartment." The voice said, "You may not know me, but I know you. Open up so we can talk." I went over to the peephole, and it was the tall dude from the bar. I loudly said, "F off, or I'm calling the cops." I heard his footsteps walk away, and heard the building door open and then close. He was gone, or so I thought. A few minutes later, I peeked out the window, and he was standing in the parking lot. He seemed to be talking to himself. At this point, I'm freaking out. I called my landlord, who lived in the building next to me. He told me to call the police, and in the meantime, him and his brother would come check things out. I called the police and tell them what's going on. They said a car is on the way. Meanwhile, my landlord and his brother make their way to the parking lot. I watch out the window and see them approach the tall dude. Tall dude takes one look at them and bolts. My landlord and his brother try to chase him, but the tall dude got away. About 5 minutes later, the police arrive. I gave my version of events and also a description of the man. The officer stares at me and says, "We've had reports of a man matching that description who has been sexually assaulting women. Thank God you didn't open the door." A few days later, I get a call from the officer. He told me part of their investigation was talking to the owner of the bar. The owner called the police when Tall Dude reappeared after a few days, and the police responded and arrested him. So tall, creepy dude from the bar, it was a close call, and I sincerely hope I never see you again. When I was a kid, my mom worked as a teacher, and she was very close to a coworker of hers who had a son around my age. When my mom or her friend would head out for the night, the other would take care of both of us kids. And basically, it meant I spent half my time over with them. My friend spent half his time over at my house, which was perfect and fun for the both of us. We lived in different cities, but since that system had been going on pretty much since forever, I grew up knowing my friend's cities just as well as mine. His mom was well aware of that. So that being said, whenever we were going on a walk in their area, she let us wander around because she knew we'd always find our way back to her. My mom, though, was more cautious and always kept an eye on us, and she'd walk behind us to make sure she'd always be able to see us. I just wish her friend would have done the same. One day, I had to be around 6 or 7 years old. We were going on a walk with my friend Marcus and his mom Katie. It was a very sunny day, and I was wearing a dress with embroidered flowers, and I had my blonde, long hair down. I often heard I was a pretty kid, even from strangers in the street, and besides making me and my parents somewhat uncomfortable, nothing bad ever happened. During that walk, Katie was walking ahead of us, and I was chatting and just fooling around with Marcus, when he suddenly remembered something urgent to tell his mom, as urgent as something can be for an 8-year-old boy. He ran up to her and left me strolling behind for a couple of minutes, just as it had happened already 100 times prior. That time though, we were circling around a big camping site, and we walked by vans and camping cars. One of those vans had its back doors open, and there was a man, probably in his mid-40s, smoking a cigarette and leaning on his van. He locked eyes with me as I was approaching, then saw that Katie and Marcus weren't paying much attention to me, as they were already a couple meters ahead. Then he proceeded to pull me by my arm close to him, and so I found myself with my body touching his. So weirded out that I didn't even say a word, although I knew Katie would have heard me if I called for help. He leaned toward me, as he was obviously much taller than I was, muttering something I didn't get, and he winked at me, and then pulled me to the open doors of his van. At this point, if he had pushed me just a little, I would have fell into the van. At this point, I was just too scared to even lift a finger, and even though I didn't understand everything that was going on, I knew it wasn't okay. He put his hands on the doors as to close the vehicle, and I felt my heart sink. At that exact moment, some other man jogged towards us, in his mid-40s as well, waving hello to me and saying something along the lines of, "I lost sight of you for a bit. I was scared." He had a very friendly look on his face and was staring at me with great insistence and with a huge reassuring smile. The creep awkwardly laughed and yanked me out of the way of the car, slamming the door shut. I ran to Katie as I heard the van go off and just acted as if nothing had happened. To this day, I never told that story to anyone. Not to Katie or Marcus, not to my mom, nobody. I am 22 years old today. So to the friendly guy who obviously didn't lose sight of me or whatever, but just probably saw everything and wanted to interfere from the bottom of my heart, thank you. To the pedophile who surely would have abducted me and who was strangely okay with trying to take a kid in public in broad daylight, I'm not even in the mood to add anything to what happened. But everyone thinks the same as I do, and I wish you hell. And let's not ever meet again, although I think I'd be too old for you. My name is Justin, and I've worked in the morgue for over 10 years. You see and hear all kinds of gruesome, creepy, and disturbing stuff. I've seen everything from a body torn up from getting caught in the propeller of a boat to a person that was shot to death in a gunfight with cops. So many bullet holes. I've also seen people who are victims of suicide. I'll let you use your imagination. You also hear all kinds of creaks and snaps and steps. I mean, you're around dead people all day. You're bound to hear something even when you're alone at 3 a.m. One night, I had finished wrapping up a victim from a DUI crash and decided to get myself a sandwich. I was about to walk out to my car and saw a silver Toyota parked outside. I should have been the only car in the parking lot. I stood by the door staring at the driver. They had their head facing me. I couldn't make out their face, but by the build I could tell it was a man. After a few moments he drove off, and with the help of the streetlight, I saw his face. He looked to be about 40-something and was bald and very thin. He was the definition of a creep. I got back from lunch and didn't see his car again. I went back to work and I got a feeling like something wasn't right. You know the feeling you get when you feel like something is staring at you? I felt a stare, but couldn't tell where it was coming from. I grabbed a scalpel and put it in my pocket just in case. I went back to work on the body of an early 20-something-year-old lady, and when I opened the walk-in fridge where we keep the bodies, she was on the floor. I jumped. I wasn't expecting to see a corpse on the floor. It looked like she was crawling away. Her body was extended, and her arms were stretched out over her head, as if someone was pulling her. I went to grab her and put her back in her bed when I heard a voice say, "Put her down." I turned around quickly and saw the same guy I had seen in the parking lot. "What are you doing in here?" I yelled. "Well, she's mine, and I came to pick her up," the man said. "She is so beautiful. I told her she would be mine, but instead she decided to get a restraining order out against me. Why do women do this to men that love them? You you were the one that killed her." I yelled at him as he walked over to grab her body. I warned him to back off and leave before I called the cops, and he swung and hit me in the jaw. I stumbled back, nearly falling onto the corpse. I remember I had the scalpel in my pocket, and I pulled it out and threatened to cut him if he didn't leave. He tried to take the scalpel away from me, and I cut him on his hand and landed a second cut right above his eye. These scalpels were razor sharp. The cut was down to the bone. He let out a scream and ran off. I ran and locked myself in the main office. I called the police and they came by and searched the entire property. They found nothing. He left without a trace. I showed the police officers the footage from the cameras. They told me he was wanted for the murder of 4 women. He was also a registered sex offender. This sick individual thought he could break into a morgue and take back one of his victims. He had no remorse for what he had done and had the audacity to return for his trophy. This goes to show how sick some people really are. Let's not meet again.